In this video, we're going to learn about nodes in Mind Workstation. Now, nodes is fundamental to the operation of Mind Workstation. In NeuroProgrammer, nodes only control the frequency on any given content track that you have, and the other settings for pitch and volume and otherwise are set for each one of those nodes at a node level. So Mind Workstation exposes nodes for every single parameter that you have available, which makes for much more intuitive editing and much quicker editing, because now you have a timeline with nodes for every single parameter that you need. For instance, now we're looking at a node for entrainment here in the entrainment track, whereas here's a node for pitch in the pitch track. This is an isochronic tone track. And then you have nodes for volume. You have nodes for every single setting. So that makes for a much more intuitive editing, and also shows why the entrainment track is separated, being the controller track. And you may want to review the video on entrainment tracks if these concepts aren't familiar to you. But they are fundamental to Mind Workstation. So let's just look at nodes. In the video on entrainment tracks, I laid out how that this timeline represents a graph of, this is the y-axis with frequency, whereas the y-axis on the pitch track would be the frequency of the pitch of the tone that's playing back. Whereas on volume, the y-axis is the volume level, currently set to 20 here. Nodes create waypoints essentially for the animating properties of a track. So if I were to add another node, I could right click and choose add node. And if this node here, you see now we have two nodes. Nodes are the little circle, and when you select them, they turn orange. And you'll also notice that it becomes highlighted between the two nodes, because this is now the segment of this session. This is a segment. So between the two nodes is a segment, and then this would be the starting node and the ending node for that segment. And you see that while there's not being a node shown at the end of the session, there's in fact an implicit one there that is just the same as the last node in the session, in this case 10 Hertz. Now, because these two nodes are of the same value, then nothing is actually occurring between these two. So there's no change, there's no interpolation or animating of parameters that's happening. So it's really only a visual display at this point to break up parts of the session, and maybe there's some use for you to make markers. If you needed a marker, then you could simply create a node that is of the same value as the preceding value, and it would act as a marker, but nothing would change between these two. However, if I drag it up or I drag it down, now there is a change between these two nodes. So from the period of 0 starting point up until 5:17, in this case 5 minutes and 17 seconds, it's going to change from 10 to 8.25. So the frequency is going to drop down over that period of time, and that's really the primary use of nodes, is to create a controllable change over a period of time. There's two tools in particular that operate on nodes. There's this pointer tool at the top, which is your main tool that you're going to be using. If you have the pointer tool selected, then you can drag up and down, left and right for a node. And then there is the add node tool. Okay, the add node tool does what it says, it adds nodes. So you go along and you click. Each time you click, you're adding a node. Now, from the pointer tool, because you're almost always going to be working within the pointer tool, you can hold the Alt key on your keyboard and temporarily access the Add Node tool. So from the pointer, if you Alt click, then you temporarily access the Add Node tool. Then you release that and you're back to the pointer tool. So that's a way to quickly add nodes. Let's go ahead and get rid of them. All right, so in a session itself, when you've added nodes with the tool, you don't have to be extremely precise. Just add a number of nodes, because as you select one just by clicking on it with the pointer tool, or you can drag a selection around it by holding down your mouse button and dragging. Now I have 4 nodes selected, which again accounts for 3 segments. So now I can operate on these nodes entirely. So if I set a frequency here, then you can see that the frequency of all those nodes is set. Whereas if I just select a single node and change its frequency, then only that one is affected. But you could see how that I don't have to be extremely precise, because I can change my values here. So right now this is at 12 minutes 9 seconds, and I could just go over here to the time in the node properties and change that to 12, and I'm at 12 minutes. So I could easily just go through each one that's at 4 minutes. I want to set it to 4 minutes, and so I changed that. Now there's some snapping options that you can do as well, which we'll go over in other videos, because I want to get into a lot of detail about the snapping. So there you are. That's how you create a ramp, essentially, in Mind Workstation. Now let's just look a little more detail, because that's the entrainment track. So now the entrainment is going to follow this outline of speeding up, slowing down slightly over this period of time, slowing down a little bit more dramatically over a period of time, and then flatlining. Now we can add a node at the end here, which is rather common, to ramp up at the end of the session. So I could set that to a value. So you could see the contour of the session, and that's determining how the frequency changes. Now, in each track, as mentioned, in Mind Workstation, there are nodes available. So if I add nodes here, I'm changing the pitch over time. And if I select a new parameter, volume, now I'm changing the volume over time. So every single parameter, well, not every, because some of them are waveforms, for instance, like this waveform type doesn't have nodes that are in it. Intensity does, so I could change the depth of the modulation, the intensity of the flash or the audio pulsing by adding nodes. And pan has nodes as well, so I can easily just pan back and forth. So most every parameter, including effects that you add. So let's say, for instance, that I added a low pass filter to this. All right, so that opens up the ability to add a node for the cutoff frequency. So see, now I'm changing and animating over time the cutoff frequency. So in Mind Workstation itself, nodes are fundamental to the operation of the program and are a major advancement over that which is available in NeuroProgrammer, although they essentially work the same, because of the separation of functions between the entrainment and any given parameter for a track. We now have full control to perfectly animate anything. Now, as in NeuroProgrammer, and to a greater level, we are also able to sync these nodes with those of other tracks. So if I was in the pitch, for instance, and I wanted to sync that with the entrainment track to get the same outline, I could either use a range to do so. So let's say I wanted to go from 120 to 220. I could do so, which is a similar operation to that which is in NeuroProgrammer. Now I want you to notice that this is a big circle and these are small circles. Now what that means is that is a virtual node. You can look at that at a glance and see that this track is synced somewhere else. You might not know exactly by first glance where it's synced, but you can tell by the node that it's a virtual node because of the size. Now, I'll also go over some tricks about that. And I did mention that you can expand the capabilities of the syncing in Mind Workstation, and you can do so by adding a simple formula. So the value here, will go into formulas in great detail, but for now I'm just going to keep it simple. The value is what we have linked with the entrainment track. So it's the value of this entrainment track. Let's say I multiplied that value times 20, which is something I find to be very useful. Now, the frequency of 10 is going to give me value times 20. Then this is going to be 10 times 20, which is 200. So the pitch will be 200, and then so on and so forth as we move across the entrainment. You could see that it keeps the same curve, but the frequency, or the pitch, I should say, of the tone track, the pitch of the tone is going to be 20 times the value of the entrainment. And so in Mind Workstation, that shows how you can create a really small formula that's really quite powerful to go in with your sessions. But anyway, this was just a basic overview of nodes, and there's more to learn about it, but it is fundamental to the operation of Mind Workstation for you to understand how to work nodes. And fortunately, it's pretty easy. In some future videos, we'll go over generating nodes.